Hello and thank you for joining us on Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines recently. I am Jacinta Agochukwu. This week, President Bola Tinubu directs review of proposed 8,000 naira cash palliative following public criticisms of the policy as he meets Vice President, state governors to continue consultation with key players on how to get the economy on sound footing. Also this week, Labour threatens to pull out of talks with the federal government, accuses government of insensitivity to the suffering of Nigerians. Later on the show, Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NMPCL, adjusts pump price of petrol to 617 naira in Abuja and 568 naira in Lagos. All the details in a moment. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Earlier in the week, President Bola Tinubu ordered a review of its earlier plan to distribute monthly cash grant of 8,000 naira to 12 million households for 6 months as part of efforts to assuage the hardship occasioned by fuel subsidy removal. This development followed public criticisms of the policy, with the organized labor saying it falls short of the level of intervention required to ease the pains of vulnerable Nigerians. The president also directed that the whole palliative package be unveiled to Nigerians and for the immediate release of fertilizers and grains to appropriately 50 million farmers and households, respectively, in all the 36 states and the FCT. In addition to this, President Tinubu and Vice President Kashim Shettima met with President of the Senate, Senator Godswill Akpabio, and some state governors as part of efforts to cushion the effect of the petrol subsidy removal on the population. The meeting was part of the president's continued consultation with key players on how to get the economy on sound footing. Well, I have two gentlemen joining me. One is Lumbe Akinkube, Chairman of the State Information Technology Agency, is with me here in the studio. And I have Babatunde Ogundiro, a policy analyst, who is joining me via Zoom. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, and thank you for having me as always.
Mr. Babatunde, are you there? Good evening and welcome to the show.
Jacinta, how are you?
I'm good. So let me begin with you. What was your reaction to the order of the review of the 8,000 conditional transfer by the president?
Okay, my reaction was basically that two things came to my mind. The first thing was that we have a president that's actually listening. Because if you look at the outcry from the people all over the place, that's a lot of use and cry all over the place. And for Mr. President to have ordered a review of it says one thing about him, that is listening to the people. And that, for me, is something that I actually I really appreciate. Then, aside that, it also tells us that he has a lot of people around him that are actually looking towards the welfare of the people. And don't forget, one of the main things he actually told us, that he is here to renew the hope that has been lost in the past. And for him to have done that, it means that he really has the Nigerian people at heart. So I'm not surprised that that is actually coming from him. He's only fulfilling the mandate of what he actually promised Nigerians.
All right, let me come to you, Mr. Lumbe. You know, this 8,000 naira policy have generated a lot of criticism. Some say that it might not even get much based on the targeted population and won't accomplish much. Now, you are an IT expert. What do you think? What is the appropriate or alternative palliative can be the appropriate replacement here?
From a replacement perspective, I think I wouldn't say so much about what could be a replacement, but using technology, what can we achieve and how do we reach the people that these palliatives are meant to get to? I think, first of all, what we need to do is dimension what we mean by poverty. So when there was a huge outcry of the sum of 8,000 naira, now some may argue and say 8,000 naira is too small. It should be, I mean, thank goodness it's been reviewed by the president and the team. But in my own experience, especially in my constituency where I've had the opportunity to go around 2 local governments, 22 wards, and a couple of villages and settlements. You'd be amazed at what 8,000 naira can actually do to some people, for some people. What we're talking about is poverty is multidimensional, right? So poverty is not just one way. It's not a cookie cutter. The same way the subsidy, removal of subsidy would affect you, is not the same way it would affect someone who is a subsistence farmer from where I'm from in Ondo State, for example. So it's a bit difficult for us to assume that 8,000 naira palliative in figures is meant for you and I. It isn't. The way the subsidy affects you and me is completely different from the way it will affect who we consider the poorest of the poor. Now, what we can do in terms of technology, and I remember in the Renewed Hope agenda and the manifesto of the president, there was extensive mention of a national identity system, right? And of course, we've done things like the national identity, NIN. But one thing we also have that is ubiquitous all over the country at the moment, regardless of where, is the telephone. Now, we're aware that there are ways where you can make payments using USSD. There's a proliferation of POS operators in places where remotest places, where you'd be surprised you find somebody that has a POS. Now, you have POSs that are offline that still enable you to carry out transactions regardless of whether they're connected to the internet or not. So these are ways where we can actually deploy technology to ensure that these funds, whether it's 8,000 naira, whether it's 10,000 naira, whatever naira it is that is decided upon by the government at the end of the day, we definitely need to find a way to use technology to address these issues.
All right, let me come to you, Mr. Babatunde. The president and his vice also had meetings with state governors to examine how to cushion the effects of removal of the fuel subsidy. How timely would you say the move was, especially as consultations are on, to lessen the effect as is still going on almost 2 months after the removal?
Yeah, basically, the removal of subsidy is something that we all know, all Nigerians know that it is actually very imperative that it must happen. So for us to probably shy away from it is not actually the best strategy. So for him to have actually removed it, that is the only thing we can actually do at this point in time. Because results, I was telling someone a couple of hours ago that if you have an organization and you continue to borrow money to pay salaries, it means that on ab initio, that organization should not be in existence. So if you now have a nation that has to borrow money all the time to pay salaries, to do this and do that, it's not actually the best for us. And we all know in Nigeria that we all agree that subsidy must be removed. And in as much that we've agreed that it must be removed, then it must go. Fine, it might have its own consequences, but I believe on the long run, the main thing is that, well, let's look at the big picture. The big picture is that if we remove subsidy, then we have other things we can actually do in terms of proceeds from federal government and oil and every other thing. And we can actually use that for infrastructure, for education, for technology, and for so many things. So the question is, it has gone. And the most important thing Nigerians would want Mr. President to do is for us or for them to actually use the money judiciously. In as much that we all know that subsidy has to go, I think everybody should also understand the fact that at this point in time, we might be experiencing this citizen period. But what is actually important is to also look at the big picture. It is not an event. It is still, it's a journey. And we'll continue to go and go and go until we get it right. So as far as I'm concerned, and for most Nigerians, we only need to just understand the plight of the federal government. That's all.
That's actually the issue. Some Nigerians don't even understand there is, this hardship. I feel the federal government should also come in and see if there's a way we can, relate to Nigerians, converse and tell them what really is going on. Because some Nigerians don't really understand what's going on and they are all with the pain and all of that. But let's take a short break, gentlemen. We still have more to talk about, Mr. Babatunde. Let's take a short break now, and Newsweek continues in a moment. Thank you for staying with us. And if you're just tuning in, it's Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines recently. Now, Nigerian Labour Congress has warned that it may be forced to withdraw from the dialogue with the federal government over the cushioning of the hardship brought on Nigerians by the withdrawal of petrol subsidy by President Bola Tinubu. This followed the decision by the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited to raise the pump price of petrol in its Abuja filling stations from 537 naira per litre to 617 naira. In a statement signed by NLC President Joe Ajero, the union accused the government of callousness, saying its palliative measures to address the repercussions of the subsidy removal lack transparency. But group's chief executive officer of NNPC, Mele Kyari, claimed market forces were responsible for the increase in pump price of petrol. However, Kyari said there was no shortage of product supply. I still have Olumbe and Babatunde with me in the studio. Let me come to you, Mr. Olumbe. What's your opinion to the, reaction to the reaction threat by NLC? Do you think they should pull out or continue with the negotiation?
I mean, I think it would be disingenuous for the NLC to pull out of the current negotiations ongoing with the federal government with regards to the elevation of the subsidy removal and other issues. Reason being that we were talking about communication as well as understanding. The Nigerian Labour Congress cannot in any way say that they're not aware that 96% of the federal government's revenues right now are being used to offset obligations, right? Which in effect means that for the government to be able to meet its salary obligations to the workers, we're actually borrowing money to fund that. Now, the average Joe on the streets may not have that information, perhaps, but the Nigerian Labour Congress leadership cannot say that they're not aware of this information. Secondly, the fact that subsidy was removed, subsidy was not removed by this government. Subsidy was removed by the outgoing president, and it was something that was unsustainable then. And I think President Bola Ahmed Tinubu only reiterated and said, well, subsidy is gone because we're not going to go back to where we're coming from anymore, right? So it is not as if, this government came in one day and then decided, oh, we're going to remove subsidy. It was unsustainable.
That's what Nigerians believe.
Well,
the way he said it, subsidy is gone. And
well,
the next
it would have been illegal even if the government of today had continued with subsidy, because we're all aware of the bill that was signed by the outgoing president. But furthermore, and this is why I say that it will be disingenuous, because we know these things. These things are not they're not being pulled out of the air, right? And if we can excuse the average person who maybe does not have access to media, maybe does not read newspapers, that's fine. But the leadership of the NLC, I'm sure they have this information.
What would you have them do?
Well, one thing is important. We are a low-trust society, right? Which means that a lot of the problems we have in terms of people understanding and people agreeing to the issues we have today is because, we've heard it before. Governments over time have said, bear with us, we're going to make things
trust
better.
Deficit.
So there's a huge trust deficit. So what we need to do, what the government needs to do, is to ensure that every single person is carried along, whether it's in the updating or of the National Social Register that generated a bit of furor, whether it's in articulating the direct palliatives, whether it's transport, whether it's educational, sectoral, carry everybody along. Or even the governors, which is why it was a National Executive Council meeting, right? The governors, all the stakeholders have to go back to their states, educate the citizens, let them understand exactly what is going on. And I think transparency, that's really what we need.
All right, Mr. Babatunde, another thing NLC had also done is to reject the 500 billion naira subsidy palliative proposed by the government to cushion the effect of fuel subsidy removal. And now this, do you think the NLC is doing too much or that their actions are sensible? Is the government being insensitive to Nigerians, like they said?
For me, at this point in time, I think NLC as an organization needs to also put the Nigerian masses first. Why? Because it's important that if they claim they're actually fighting for Nigerians, then they also need to actually sit down and actually look at the scenario very well. If, for example, you're saying that you're pulling out, you are rejecting this, you are rejecting that, then what's the way forward? For me as an individual, I think NLC should do more in terms of engaging the government, in terms of sitting down with the government and actually find a way forward for the Nigerian masses. It is not fair on the side of the NLC to embark on or to say they are pulling out one or to actually reject what the government is actually doing in its entirety. For me as an individual, I would rather let them come in, sit down with the government and find a way to actually get through the tunnel and probably give alternatives or suggest better solutions for the federal government rather than pulling out. That is my take on that.
But what if NLC, does pull out of talks? What could be the repercussion?
The repercussion is we're going to eat up the polity. And don't forget, the Nigerian masses are, actually agitated at this point in time. We are looking at a new government and that promised renewed hope. And the government in itself is still integrating. Even the government, for example, has not even set up the cabinet. So a lot of people still need to come on board to bring about ideas, to bring about solutions, to move the nation forward. So if at this point in time, NLC is now, doing otherwise, it is going to spell a lot of doom for the nation. And this is not the time that NLC should actually do this. This is the time for NLC to work hand in hand with the federal government and consolidate whatever intents, whatever ideas that the federal government have for the good people of Nigeria. So for me, it's important that NLC comes to the table with the federal government and actually walk down the aisle with the federal government. Because like the other speaker said, the NLC leadership cannot claim that they don't understand the fact that the nation, not even just the nation, the entire world is in a precarious moment. So this is not the point where NLC can actually choose to do otherwise. This is time NLC should actually put on their thinking caps and also show empathy to the federal government so that we can move Nigeria forward.
All right, gentlemen, let's move to our final story for tonight. Oil marketers increased the pump price of petrol at retail outlets to 617 naira per liter in Abuja and 565 per liter in Lagos. The development comes few months after the complete deregulation of the downstream petroleum sector. The group chief executive officer of NNPCL, Kyari, blamed the market forces for the increase, while the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, IPMAN, expressed concern over the increment. It's noted that the living standards of the people would plunge, especially with the government not providing the necessary palliatives to cushion the effects of subsidy removal. As you have with me, Olumbe and Babatunde in the studio, let me come to you. You hear analysts saying that it will get worse before it will get better. Now, the question every Nigerian is asking is, when is it ever going to get better? But did you expect this rate of increase?
I didn't, because unfortunately I'm not an oil expert, and I have maybe a basic rudimentary understanding of economics. But if I use that basic understanding, it's that market forces will prevail. Once subsidy has been removed, in terms of controlling of pricing, which was what the subsidy was, the NNPC, through the federal government, through the NNPC, was controlling the price, which is why it was kept at where it was. But now that we have it at market forces at play, then the price is going to be a function of what the cost to the independent marketers are. I recall that I think day before yesterday, I think the first about 20 million liters by, I think it was Emadeb Energy, came into the country, yet to be discharged. However, what I think contributed to this sharp increase was the increase in the price of oil, right? Now, obviously, petrol is a derivative of oil, of crude oil. And unfortunately, we don't have the refining capacity in the country at the moment. Now, if you talk about it getting worse before it gets better, we have the Dangote refinery coming up at some point in the near future, hopefully before the end of this year. We have the other 2 or 3 refineries that are owned by the government, which are at an advanced stage. So by the time those come on stream, definitely it will affect the cost. From what I gathered, the landing cost of petrol as of last week, without any profit or logistics added onto it, was over 560 naira. I think the Secretary of IPMAN, I saw him on TV rolling out those figures. So again, if oil goes up to $120, $130 per barrel, then the price of refined petrol, the refined product, is going to go up. What we should expect, or what we should encourage the government to do, is where those shocks are, with regards to transportation, with regards to health services, with regards to education, where there's a balance and a trade-off, is to inject some sort of palliatives, as much as I dislike that word, in those areas of the economy where you trade off what you lose from subsidy, and then you are enjoying some sort of benefit or some sort of subsidy in other areas. So, like I said earlier on, petrol is not the only way that you can determine who is going to enjoy some level of palliative or not.
I also want to find out, how do you think the government can ensure that the marketers, do not exploit this situation by, determining the price, regardless how much they must have bought?
Well, that's very, very important. And I believe that the government has the regulatory agencies. I believe when the NNPC became, a limited liability company and was unbundled, there's the NPPRA, and there's some other regulatory authorities who are supposed to work with the marketers to ensure that whatever cost it is they're bringing in, it is transparent. Unfortunately, at this moment, the average person like me and you do not have access to those figures. So again, we need to encourage transparency in all that we're doing at this point. It's very, very important that everyone is carried along. We're not going to say the independent marketers should not make money. It's a business at the end of the day, but we don't expect them to gouge profits, as it were.
All right, Mr. Babatunde, finally on this topic, Nigerians are asked to brace up and be patient in a country overly dependent on oil. What solutions in tech would be an alternative?
Well, it's important that we all know that we run a monolithic economy. So the first thing first is we need to try as much as possible to diversify our economy. Look at other things aside from oil. I remember we learned in those days that the great sage Obafemi Awolowo built Obafemi Awolowo University with proceeds from cocoa, built Premier Hotel, gave free scholarships and free education to people and all, using cocoa. So it means that we should also try as much as possible to diversify the economy. Let's think beyond petroleum as our own major source of revenue and look at other things, agriculture, technology. Look at India, for example. At some point in time, they always have the highest number of, tech guys in the likes of Microsoft, Google, and all. We can also do the same thing. We can export our talents. We can do everything all like that. We should just de-emphasize this petroleum thing so that we can have other things that we can concentrate on and get revenue for the country. That is one thing we need to do, basically.
All right, I won't end the show without hearing from tech expert. What solution in tech do you think can be an alternative here?
Well, I think I have what I've always considered the magic bullet, and I'm thankful that Mr. Babatunde mentioned the Southern Asian economies and what they've been able to do with technology. So a very quick win for us would be what we call business outsourcing. In ordinary terms, would be your call centers. Now, business outsourcing contributes about $250 billion to the Indian economy today. I mean, they have campuses as big as University of Ibadan in Bangalore that act as call centers for the biggest companies all over the world. If we're able to accelerate that process in Nigeria, because we have our biggest export, as far as I'm concerned, is not oil, it's our people. With the youth population of Nigeria today is between 40 to 50% of the total population of the country. Now, if we're able to harness that, those partnerships with the overseas companies that are looking for where to outsource their businesses to, Nigeria, I think, is a fertile and ready ground.
All right, gentlemen, I've been speaking with Olumbe Akinkube, Chairman, Ondo State Information Technology Agency, and as well Babatunde Ogundiro, a policy analyst. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome, Jacinta.
All right, and that's our show for today. Remember, you can follow the conversation on our social media platforms at TVC News NG on our website at tvcnews.tv. I am Jacinta Agochukwu. Until next week, it's goodbye.